Hello, everybody. I'm Allan Krans. I'm going to take us into today's session. I have a number of my colleagues joining me today. Catie Merrill, Nicki Catchpole, as well as Evan Woollacott, to focus today on how we see cloud vendors using their COVID stimulus. And so there's some wordplay there, but we'll go through what that means and how we see that playing out both from a vendor as well as a customer and market standpoint. So before we jump right into the session, just a few housekeeping notes. At the bottom of your screens, there's a series of buttons from left to right. You can access the slides, you can control the audio, submit Q&A, which we welcome throughout the session. And then after we complete today's webinar, there'll be a survey. We appreciate you taking that and giving us feedback so we can fine-tune and make these most valuable for you going forward. So at this point, we'll jump right in with kind of the overview for what we wanted to talk about today and share with you from our most recent cloud research. So really the overall picture is that cloud from a market and from a leading vendor standpoint closed 2020 very strongly through the end of the year, and that changes things going forward. So we'll go through first reviewing what happened, what we saw in early 2021 in terms of the market and the vendor financials and how they're able to achieve growth in what was a crazy year in a lot of different ways. Secondly, we'll look at between the different categories of cloud services, how we think PaaS is becoming a more important part of that overall picture for the solutions that customers need and are using in their environments. And then lastly, digging into one of the big areas that we see cloud vendors using some of that financial momentum to invest in innovation and emerging tech. And so Nicki will close the session by going through what we're seeing there. I want to start with an overall market view. So this was updated last year. The next update is coming up, so we'll adjust these numbers a bit based on what we've seen in terms of vendor performance. But just reviewing 2020, there was a slight dip in growth in the second quarter when the pandemic's effects were really at their height, and there was a lot of uncertainty in the market on the customer and the overall market side for what the economic impact looked like, and making those adjustments to the normal that set in mid-year in terms of a lot of restrictions. And again, the uncertainty seemed to be the biggest thing when we talk to the customers and vendors that caused them to pull back a little bit of spending in that time period. But after that quarter, we really saw an acceleration as we went into fall, and it ended up being maybe false optimism, but in any regard, there was a return to spending on the customer side as they invested in IT solutions after some of the financial uncertainty lifted in the cloud market. And a lot of the leading vendors were the recipients of that in terms of accelerated revenue growth to close the year. The stimulus that we saw the cloud vendors getting from the overall year of 2020 and influenced heavily by COVID was not just in terms of revenue, however. Two other things that I think are playing a role in terms of how you see vendors managing their business and targeting growth opportunities going forward. The first is there was a kind of a confidence boost that long-term the forecast for their addressable market, in fact, improved. That there was a lot of short-term reaction from customers to adapt to COVID mid-year, but that wasn't just the only impact. There's going to be long-term changes to the way customers want to use cloud solutions and transform their business, and so that's going to lead to, we saw it in the customer research that we just wrapped up, accelerated timelines for adoption. So they're looking to be more aggressive with transforming the business, becoming more agile, and being able to access the innovation from cloud services that they see as a continuous stream instead of the update cycles that they were able to produce and manage with more traditional, typical deployment models. And then the last thing to hit on was, in terms of the financial benefits, there was a bottom line benefit for the cloud players as well. A couple different factors. They saw increased utilization led to higher gross margin. Obviously, that's a little bit short term for them. However, there are longer term effects around sales and marketing and overall efficiency with innovation. So we saw expense levels decrease as a percentage of revenue, and profitability rise as a result. So if we look at AWS, Microsoft, Google, some of the bigger platform vendors, probably like a 3 to 4% increase in their operating margin through 2020. And in Google's case, they continue to lose money at the operating line due to their heavy investment and really kind of buying market share in a lot of different ways. But they did narrow that margin in 2020. So really across the board, we saw an improvement in margins that, again, is part of what ended up being a financial benefit for them as a result of everything that happened during the year of 2020. So that covers the vendor side. So this will give some color on what we saw with customers. This is a dense slide. It comes directly from a report that's publishing very shortly that looks at the cloud applications behavior for customers. So it's based on a survey of 200 cloud adopters, as well as a number of different interviews that are conducted over the last 6 months in terms of the types of use cases, workloads, and what's driving them to adopt cloud-based application solutions. And so when we look at what happened, it really gives more depth for the increase in aggressiveness for their migration plans. It's qualitative, but in a number of the interviews, folks talked about being 20 or 30% cloud-based today, but had plans over the next 3 years to have a majority of that landscape in their environment be cloud-based, and really a roadmap and a commitment to make that happen. And that's more aggressive than we've seen in prior discussions and iterations of this study. So there was a notable shift in terms of folks really planning to accelerate that timeline for investment and move more aggressively. Going back to kind of what's driving that, cost for a lot of times early in cloud days was seen as the biggest driver of why things were shifting or being developed in a cloud-based environment versus a traditional one. I think we saw the recognition in this version of the study that cloud a lot of times is more expensive, that there's, even if you look at it on a longer term basis, so not just the immediate benefit of shifting to an OpEx model, that all of the expenses associated with that do add up, and many times are at least as expensive as the traditional model. However, it's the agility, the flexibility, and most importantly, the innovation that customers saw, especially during a time where they needed to change process and access new features very quickly. That's really top of mind for customers in terms of the type of solutions that they want going forward, so that they can be ready for uncertain times that, who knows what the disaster or challenge might be, but they valued that flexibility and innovation. In terms of the solutions, so it was an apps-focused study, but we saw for most customers, there were 63% that reported off-the-shelf, it isn't enough on its own. they need to customize and really create their own solutions that map their business, their environment, their vertical. So it goes to a lot of the kind of mixed environment with private cloud integrated there. A lot of stuff is going to remain on-prem. We didn't hear a lot of customers talking about an entirely cloud-based environment, so that's going to remain alongside their growing cloud landscapes. And so the platform is really the way that they're looking to address that and leverage capabilities that integrate and allow them to create those more customized solutions. And then lastly, so that's one way to customize. The other way is to have the vendors provide things that are specialized for vertical industry size, those type of things. That seems to be more of an emerging requirement today as folks are trying to get more of the mission critical core business apps over to a cloud-based environment. So it's not a requirement today, but it is something that customers are thinking about as they look to go from, say 20% of the environment, which is pretty low risk and standardized workloads, to things that are customized based on their industry. Nicki, did you want to add a little bit on the industry part there?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Alan. So yes, to echo your point on the industry specialization, it has been a significant trend as of late, and likely a lasting one that has emerged particularly over the course of the last year. And I think we all know it's no coincidence that it's also been accelerated by changes brought about by COVID. People are more comfortable with the benefits of the cloud and are now starting to demand the benefits of even more customized and nuanced solutions that pertain to their distinct challenges. There also is no one real linear way to look at this trend towards industry cloud, as it ties into things like the dynamics of partnerships between cloud vendors, between vendors and customers, and as industry ecosystems emerge, as well as how cloud vendors interact with IT services or consultancy firms and even industry-specific experts. The AWS example here, with the two leading EHR companies, Epic and Cerner, is a good one. It touches on the tightening of relationships between vendors and customers, who in turn serve a whole population of other customers. And keeping in the context of AWS's efforts in the healthcare vertical, from just a pure R&D standpoint, they're developing in-house solutions such as with Amazon Health Lake is a good example. It's a HIPAA-eligible service that takes an organization's complete data across various silos and in different formats and centralizes it into a singular data lake using machine learning. That's just one of many, many examples. And a vendor that I find interesting, and one that we don't speak about maybe as much as we should, but when it comes to industry cloud, Alibaba Cloud has been really quietly leading with industry solutions for longer than most, with its intelligent brain suite of industry-specific solutions. What Alibaba does here is use a singular architectural backbone to build applications and provide services in a wide range of industries, pretty much any industry you could really think of, from aviation, environment, finance, healthcare, manufacturing. But it's really the city brain. They call each of these little modules their brain solutions, which is the most complex offering, as they've been able to manage traffic flow, public transportation, and public safety through the integration of input from sensors located across these really vast, sprawling, and highly complex urban centers in places not only in China, through municipal governments like that with Shanghai, but also agencies across APAC. And you can imagine how complex these systems get when thinking about the level of population and traffic and activity alone in that region. So Alibaba's focus on industry solutions, while it's mostly rooted in their own R&D, they've also started to kind of tenuously reflect this in their partnering strategy as well. A recent example with a European software vendor, Temenos, is a good example. As the two companies are now working together to enable financial institutions to run Temenos' core banking applications in the public cloud, and leverage related technologies for scale and greater efficiencies. So they're just kind of dipping their toes in the water of industry solutions in the kind of vein of partnerships. And I think Alibaba Cloud is a really interesting one to watch, in that kind of on the flip side, they are a leading cloud vendor, that a lot of the vendors, much bigger vendors, will start to kind of emulate what they've been able to accomplish so far, particularly with their brain solutions. So, with that, I will pass the mic over to Evan. I believe, Evan, you had a couple of more examples of industry solutions and things that you wanted to expand upon.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. And hello to everybody on the line. So yeah, I want to provide a bit more commentary on the trends and dynamics happening within industry cloud, because I think there's a strong correlation to the second topic we have here related to platform as a service and the role it has in kind of driving those SaaS and IaaS growth opportunities. So what I mean in saying that is, a driver of more of this industry-led approach by vendors is the growing maturity of the enterprise cloud environments by the customers. So as these more mainstay horizontal cloud applications like CRM become more commonplace in the market, what we're finding from the customer angle is they're exploring new ways to use the cloud-based assets to kind of alleviate or augment their industry-specific needs. So those innovations may be as simple as tying into the relevant industry data hubs, such as, within healthcare, efforts around tying into EHR, which is an effort which was used by both Microsoft and Salesforce when they launched their respective healthcare clouds earlier in 2020. And they each contain those necessary data models to link into, Epic, Cerner, and the other EHR providers in the space. But, while the public cloud players are pursuing that opportunity, I think it's important that they don't underestimate the inherent complexities associated with these industry-led solutions. I think there's going to be a really critical need to work closely with the IT services and consulting ecosystem, because these players understand the highly nuanced operating environments of the industries, be it manufacturing, healthcare, life sciences, and so on. And this is because while clients' cloud maturity is rising and their IT environments are becoming more modernized, the tech is only one part of the evolution. The underlying business processes which sort of support or are augmented by these industry-led solutions must also be addressed and modernized, and this dynamic plays directly into the strength of those IT services and consulting providers. So while this maturing market has kind of resulted in the rebirth, so to speak, of the industry-led portfolio, which, as we all know, was kind of kicked off in 2014 by SAP, what it's also done is it's kind of increased the importance of PaaS-led innovation efforts. The growing maturity of public cloud and correspondent compute requirements by the clients has only served to kind of separate the IaaS leaders in TBR's public cloud benchmark from the rest of the pack, because these leaders are expanding their share, and it's resulting in further consolidation of the IaaS market. Specifically, the top 4 IaaS providers in TBR's latest benchmark for the public cloud, so AWS, Microsoft, Google, and Alibaba, accounted for 91% of the benchmarked IaaS revenue. And with this growing consolidation, we expect to see more commoditization of compute and storage as these leaders compete at cost and they broaden their addressable markets, be it through additional partnerships with networking entities like AT&T and Verizon, in addition to the more recent partnerships with these satellite-type firms to target the IoT-related workload opportunities, which then, too, would bring substantial stores of device-based data to their IaaS platforms. While having the ability to capture that data is crucial, though, more critical is the ability to make use of the information. And enterprises will likely try to self-innovate as they access the information from these devices, and thus requiring platform capabilities to kind of support and explore new ways of using the data alongside their existing operations. In short, providing developers, be it those who work for the customer, those who work for the platform providers themselves, the services partners of those platform providers, and then also the vendor's own developer ecosystems. So with these tools to explore new ways of using data sources to improve their operations, they can kind of accelerate the ability to kind of lead with these portfolios in the marketplace. Microsoft, for instance, is a great example of this approach, as over the past year, has continued to provide toolkits to the GitHub community to support these developer-led innovation efforts. More recently, they've kind of targeted these AI and ML toolkits through GitHub, seeking to reduce the design complexities associated with the technology to accelerate the development of high compute workloads which customers can then deploy. And these innovations really aren't just net new use cases. A lot of the times it's just exploring ways to augment existing solutions or services with, AI and ML enabled assets. I think the latest acquisition too is a great example of how Microsoft can kind of use these AI and NLP-based capabilities as a value-add component to its existing offerings. Nuance's value isn't just within healthcare because, that's where obviously Nuance's install base rests, but it's also in the context of how Microsoft can use the acquired NLP within apps like CRM to transcribe calls or provide recommendations following, customer conversations to support sales personnel in their day-to-day efforts. These efforts will only serve to accelerate the IaaS compute requirements by customers and thus further spin the meter, if you will, to drive more revenue in the space. But, outside of that platform as a service-led developer, strategy, public cloud vendors are also increasingly using the capabilities as it relates to integration to bring to market more cohesive portfolios and, drive those multi-product SaaS deals. Salesforce in particular has really effectively used that acquisition of MuleSoft dating back to 2018 to support that momentum. So basically the approach is, they were able to kind of use it as the integration bed between the sales, service, and marketing cloud to kind of drive the proliferation of their applications across that enterprise front office. And also, it's not just their internal IP. They can also create those integrations with the App Exchange ecosystem, and then also third-party, SaaS leaders in the space. And then outside of that multi-product deal execution, integration assets also serve to alleviate client concerns around vendor lock-in by, allowing clients to easily integrate with the third-party SaaS providers or even to maintain their existing application suites, which may be proprietary or legacy on-premise, by using iPaaS to tie these old systems into the net new deployments that they're pursuing. So, while these efforts will be key to driving SaaS and IaaS growth going forward, there is a growing concern by customers as it pertains to the licensing requirements and the associated total cost of ownership with these bundled or layered capabilities like security, AI, or ML. In the context of the industry-led portfolios we spoke of earlier, I'm going to again use Microsoft as a great example of this challenge. In the research we conducted for the cloud applications report that we did published last week, a respondent stated, and I'm paraphrasing a little, that unless you're an expert on the Microsoft suite, which there are only so many of at my firm, it is almost impossible to know what we own today or what we need to purchase to deploy these new modules that they're releasing. The retail cloud for healthcare is a great example of this challenge. So, well, yes, it comes with that pre-built data model. A client must first possess the necessary licenses through Dynamics to be able to deploy that new solution or that new module. So it's not just a one-stop buy. They actually have to understand, okay, which parts of this portfolio do I need so I can actually get this new module. If the vendors fail to adequately articulate the requirements to customers, it may result in sticker shock as costs mount, particularly when you start to think of that layering approach of AI and ML or NLP into these existing assets, and which is going to then result in more IaaS consumption requirements plus the new licenses they have, and then, oh, how much does that cost again? So we kind of feel that this challenge, as you put it all together, presents an opportunity for the public cloud vendors to strengthen that customer relationship by providing pricing and cost calculating solutions, which they all do offer today, as a way for these clients to better understand their environments. Evidencing this approach was another customer interview that we did where, again, the client said that an AWS account manager had reached out to him and basically suggested changing the CPU type he was using as the workloads that he was running didn't need to have the highest performance specification. And he said, afterwards it resulted in, I think it was about a 10 to 20% savings as it related to the compute. And this is only a savings that he was able to realize because AWS proactively managed that relationship and, made that client happy. So, going forward as the enterprise kind of more frequently deploys these hybrid cloud environments, using AWS, Microsoft, or Google as they see fit, we feel these pricing calculators may be a way for the platforms to strengthen the appeal of the hybrid management pains that they're all trying to pursue. So, Microsoft Azure Arc is a good example. If they can proactively integrate these pricing calculators alongside that so that they can understand, how their costs correlate across, all the workloads and infrastructure that they're consuming, be it regardless of the vendor, it'll be a strong value add to the client. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Catie to provide a bit more commentary on the hybrid cloud market as a whole and the resultant platform trends.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. So kind of continuing broadly on this theme of innovation in PaaS, that was true before the pandemic, but still it's really been about infrastructure as a service and software as a service as they kind of service the bottom and the top pillars of the cloud. But now in a post-pandemic environment where everyone's talking about digital transformation and using data as an asset to increase time to value, we're going to see those PaaS investments really ramp up from cloud vendors. And there will be an even bigger push for commoditization than we've been seeing since it all started. So as an example, we've already seen Microsoft and Red Hat capture the operating system layer. So now they're in a good position to target the control plane with Azure and OpenShift. But you also see other vendors like VMware coming into the mix, layering their application services on top of its platform. And Google Cloud, obviously, with its roots in Kubernetes, is well positioned here as well. And so the hybrid cloud market, which was booming pre-COVID, is going to present an even bigger opportunity, especially as enterprises move to the cloud faster. But this will come with a couple caveats. In light of the pandemic, flexibility, pricing transparency, consumption will be far more important in customers' migration decisions than it was before. And so because of these customer trends, we expect this theme of cloud openness to become a lot more important on the vendor side. And so on this slide, we've kind of mapped out vendor cloud openness, if you will, and these are just initial perceptions. There's a lot of different factors to consider, but in general, when we're talking about the openness in cloud, it doesn't, of course, include open source code, but it's also about deployment flexibility, diverse partner networks, consumption-based pricing on-prem, cloud agnosticism, just to name a few. So in the case of flexibility, in a hybrid world, it's really about meeting customers wherever their data resides, but with the same trusted tooling and policies and consistency customers have been used to likely inside their data center, but bringing that to the public cloud, a hosted private cloud model, or at the edge. And then it's also about flexibility, not just in where services are consumed, but how they're consumed. So cloud managed services, for example, are really gaining popularity, and this will continue to be led by that ongoing skills gap in IT that we're seeing. But then at the same time, recognizing self-service solutions are right for certain customers as well. So having that flexibility. And then infrastructure agnosticism is another really important factor. Some vendors here on this list are more focused on separating SaaS and PaaS from their own infrastructure. IBM and Google being really key examples here with their Kubernetes-based PaaS, because it's not just about offering support for services on their own cloud, but it's almost even encouraging deployments on competing clouds. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you really don't see that as much. Like in the cases of AWS, it's still very much about getting infrastructure as a service revenue dollars. Oracle and Microsoft are a little unique because they have that apps business that kind of protects them and puts them in a different positioned to take that best of suite approach. But again, in the case of AWS being very infrastructure focused, they've almost been forced to catch on to this trend. We saw that initially when they launched AWS Outposts, being a key hybrid solution, but now they're becoming more open with things like ECS and EKS Anywhere, which was actually a pretty significant move for them, and I think is helping change that perception of them as a more closed-off vendor. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of pivot around this going forward. And then, of course, it's also about commitment to open source, but as I mentioned, it extends beyond the code and is about automation, DevOps, containers, open APIs, just to name a few. And so, those are a few ways we expect vendors to kind of take advantage of this COVID opportunity. And then lastly is around pricing transparency. This is one area where AWS kind of stands out. We've heard from customers that they are drawn to AWS because of the simplicity, and they are kind of unique in that they're not faced with a huge licensing program, whereas competitors like Microsoft still kind of have to navigate those complexities as they try to fit cloud into its standard licensing. But in general, building off of what Evan was saying, we can expect the cloud players to kind of layer more pricing capabilities into their cloud management layers to sort of deliver that transparency for customers. Microsoft Azure Arc is a good example of that. The ability to provide governance and management and extend that across clouds and on-premise. So as you can kind of see, each vendor has their strong suit and are building out their PaaS and infrastructure services in some form or another. And enterprises are making those migration decisions on a workload by workload basis. And so, this presents a massive opportunity, and it'll be interesting to see what comes of these vendor portfolios as we navigate in this post-pandemic world. And so with that, Nikki, I'll pass it back to you to talk about our last topic, which is emerging technology.
Great. Thank you, Catie. So what I'm going to speak to today is all around the rapid development of emerging tech and the integration into broader portfolios, which we've been seeing as a natural expansion and extension of the influx of demand for cloud computing. And so while technologies such as machine learning and AI may seem inapplicable or beyond the scope for some organizations, even today, timelines have, of course, become remarkably compressed, and this is a trend that is not going to let up. It's just going to become more exacerbated, I believe, as time goes on. I mean, if we look back even just a few years ago, for many enterprises, cloud computing itself was considered as quote-unquote emerging and was surrounded with question marks about its challenges, including security, cost, longevity, did it really afford ROI? And now these IT roadmaps that may have spanned over 5 years, even as closely as last year, will now stop at 1 or 2 years, maybe 3 at most, just because people know things are changing so quickly and aren't willing to commit to the unknown. In addition, as investment dollars have indeed freed up and organizations have started to realize the benefits of the cloud, there's a whole new subgeneration of interconnected technologies that have started to take hold. And it's not just a matter of more money and more need. People are actually starting to trust emerging tech more, and in a short amount of time have started to see the tangible benefits that integrating things like automation, edge, AI, and ML into their overarching cloud and DT strategy can bring. So we really wouldn't be here so far along the curve if it weren't for all the silver linings of what COVID brought to the world of digital transformation. So moving to the next slide, give me one moment. So each element of emerging tech can definitely be discussed in isolation, and today I'm going to use edge computing as the example and I guess anchoring point to the overall discussion, since there are so many deep and natural integration points between edge and other areas of technology. And it would take me much longer than we have to unpack this entire circular list that I made intentionally complex that we have here. but I'll take just a minute to speak to a couple that are especially key and demonstrate how interconnected these technologies are in driving each other's growth. So starting with AI and machine learning, they're incredibly interesting, especially when thinking about them in the context of edge, as they are one of, if not the key enabling factors for intelligence at the edge. With the recent increase in access to and just general understanding and comfortability that people have now with AI and ML, demand and adoption at the edge has dramatically increased, and it's allowing people to see what really is possible at the edge. And in some ways, the relationship is kind of symbiotic, since AI and ML requires the extremely fast processing of data, which edge computing enables, and in turn, AI and ML enable higher performance of compute resources and intelligence at the edge. And I'll go a little bit more into the tangible aspects of these when we get to use cases in a couple of minutes. Then one other point that I wanted to quickly reference is related to IoT and the variety and increasing sophistication of devices themselves. Whether it's a robotic arm on a factory floor, the phone you always have in your hand itself, or a sensor that's part of a healthcare monitoring system. I mean, the list is pretty much endless. All of these devices, they are constantly increasing in power, in memory, in capability, and are becoming increasingly connected with each other. And in addition, just the sheer number of them is growing exponentially as well, which only leads to more ML, more AI, and greater relevancy of edge computing. So with these examples, you can kind of see the interconnected snowball effect that COVID drove, increasing IT consumption and opening up avenues of adoption on a much more truncated timeline than we were operating on a year or two ago. So moving just to the right side of the screen with the orange bar chart, I believe it was Allan or maybe it was Catie had referenced the customer studies that we conduct twice a year, which really enable us to get a pulse as to where people are perceiving they are in their adoption of IT overall, and that's kind of the blanket admission of the report. And this time a year ago, we didn't even have a question on edge computing in this report. And now I find it quite remarkable that for a technology that previously had been shrouded in so much debate and uncertainty, and people didn't even really know how to define it, that in the year it's gained so much traction that in this recent polling question, over 50% of respondents are either using edge or have stated intentions to implement edge into their IT strategy over the next 3 years. So for me, that's like a real kind of tangible proof point that we're asking the questions now that we didn't think to ask before, and people are changing their mindsets so quickly that they're not even questioning what it is anymore. They're saying, yes, this is important and this is where we want to go. And so while the stats and trends are all very interesting, and what I really like to get into is to some tangible examples, which really brings some of these exciting trends to life. So I will move to the next slide. As a preamble, I mean, these use cases clearly are just surface scratchers of all the vast and diverse use cases out there that have been enabled by emerging tech, and they really keep expanding as a result of increased spending and that trust that I mentioned in emerging tech, and prompted by COVID-driven need. Before going into a couple of examples, I do think it's important to start with the point that, regardless of the industry or vertical, that areas such as AI, ML, the concept of smart sensors and video analytics, they can all be applied quite universally. This kind of relates back to the point I made earlier regarding Alibaba's backbone of technology across the entire breadth of its intelligent brain suite of solutions. So for instance, if you look at retail, if you're looking at a retail inventory tracking in a store, there can be sensors placed on shelves that can communicate that a supply is running low, and which will lead to an automatic restocking of the shelves or in the forms of alerts. Which then over time through ML can inform and advise on consumption patterns. It can help preempt low stock before it's too late. And this is a pretty straightforward example. This type of sensor could also work in tandem with a camera who monitors foot traffic for real-time data, advising that an item may be popular, but it might not be in the best part of the store, and that it might be best placed in a high visibility area. In the same vein, a similar sensor on a shelf in a manufacturing floor that notifies of low stock and communicates with a robotic fulfillment arm could also make note of items that may not be optimally placed on certain pallets for efficient routing. It could be the same sort of sensor and the same sort of analytics as retail, but just in a very different environment. And of course, the examples get more and more extreme as you talk about more ruggedized environments out in the field, such as oil and gas and mining, things like that. But both the retail and manufacturing examples have really come into prominence as a result of COVID-19, and this is primarily due to all of these aspects that we experience all the time: staffing shortages, social distancing restrictions, and the sudden surge in online retail and the impact on supply chains. Retail has a couple of other interesting examples utilizing visual analytics, and these ones can kind of be a little bit of fun. Dressing room mirrors have started to be equipped with sensors and AR/VR technology that can actually interpret your image, provide suggestions as to what may go well with your current style, and recommend the piece if it's in stock so that it can be delivered to you while getting dressed, so you don't even have to retrieve it yourself. I haven't encountered that quite yet, but if the item is out of stock and you decide you would like to try it, you can mock up a fake image of what you would look like, and if you are approved, directly route it to your order to a backup warehouse. All things that seem very futuristic, but just around the corner. Digital promotions are another aspect of this, with sensors placed around stores that recommend to you in real time the types of items that you may gravitate towards, not only based on your style, but where you're spending the majority of your time in the store. And then over time, if you have patterns, can actually start to create machine learning algorithms that are unique to you. So I see this as very much like an in-person version of the pop-up ads that come up if you've been talking about renovating your house, and now all you see on your phone for a few days is local ads for designers and construction firms. So you say, oh, well, isn't that creepy that my phone is listening to me? And well, it's kind of about to get to the next level, and pretty soon it won't really seem that odd at all. So to round out the examples, I'd be remiss, and we've already touched on smart cities a bit, so I think I'll just jump right into the last one. So that being, vaccine enablement, because, not only is vaccine enablement in this case related just to the immediate need for tracking and monitoring of vaccines, but it will have extensions into other areas, once we get back things to normal and beyond the crisis. So there are a couple of examples I'd like to call out. One being the supply chain management is an interesting one. So this involves, the example I have involves Outposts in collaboration with a Danish automatic storage compliance company called Ufree. And what they've done is develop a vaccine logistics monitoring as a service solution. And so what this does is monitor the supply chain distribution between government agencies, pharmaceutical plants, and logistics companies. And beyond just temperature alone, the EDGE solution includes the monitoring of things like humidity, carbon dioxide, and the results are processed to create an alert of any disruption to the distribution process and is incorporated into ML algorithms for ongoing analysis. And then the final one I'll share, which is somewhat controversial, is regarding tracking and information sharing. So this takes a slightly different angle. The example here is IBM's blockchain technology and Salesforce Work.com are working together to enable businesses, schools, and government agencies to verify vaccination status and other health information. And then what this has done is applied to the IBM Digital Health Passport as an encrypted digital wallet on any individual smartphone to share this medical information with an organization. And this is probably one of the most tenuous and complex of the examples, as it really does contain incredibly sensitive healthcare data, communicating private data, and claims to not compromise the security of all of this data. And it's kind of one of those forays into something brand new that, if it sticks, won't just be, a remediation to a singular problem, that everyone has to get vaccinated and in short order. And we firmly believe that these kinds of advancements will make their way into longer scale healthcare remediations and also be applied to different industries such as financial services, education, what have you. So I thought that was kind of the fitting topic to round out our discussion today, and I think we actually have quite a bit of time for some questions.
All right, great. So I'll to read off some questions, give a little commentary, and then I'll look to my colleagues to join, because we do have a number of questions that we should be able to go through. Let's see, the first one is, do we see Alibaba discussing an outpost competitive response to AWS? And yes, so not only do we see them discussing, they've had a solution that's been available for a couple of years called Aspera. And there's some differences that, each and every solution in that category is really unique, right? If you look at Azure Stack, Anthos, as well as Outposts. I don't know if we have a lot of insight into the traction and how it's been deployed and how big of a portion of the business is. But Nicki, do you any more comments on what Alibaba is doing with their Outpost competitor?
Yes and no. I mean, they're always a little bit kind of under the veil with especially any of their kind of proprietary R&D efforts. That Aspera Stack definitely is being delivered in collaboration with HPE, so that'll be interesting to track. And I do know, just by virtue of how successful they've been with the deployments in urban environments and just with cities in general, and they keep building these city brain solutions and are looking to implement into more rural areas what they've been able to accomplish in highly dense zones, that this will certainly come into play and is something on their radar.
Got it. Let's see. So this question takes us back to slide 8. And so I think Catie went through some commentary on this, but the question is around just a little bit more detail on the vendor positioning for the more open versus less open. So Catie, any additional context there?
Yeah, I guess I would just say it's just meant to look at it generally in terms of the market and how, vendors are investing in some of those technologies I talked about, primarily open source, and, the ability to provide a platform that can be deployed anywhere and provide that consistency for customers. It's not anything set in stone. It's just kind of a preface of what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think from a higher level perspective, the vendors that you see being more open, especially Google and IBM, are not the leaders or the early leaders in the public cloud standalone market. So they're if for the leaders, it's all about locking up customers. They don't have a lot of incentive to encourage or enable hybrid multi-cloud type solutions, where Google and then IBM with the rest assets really trying to bridge on-prem and multiple different cloud environments and come at it from a management point of view. That's their advantage in the space, to be able to capture some of those dollars that AWS and then SAP and Oracle with the large applications businesses have been able to lock into their own customer base. All right. Let's see. There's a question on how quickly is the edge market anticipated to grow over the next 5 years? CAGR. We do have some reports that look at this, so we can follow up and see if they're part of the subscription, and at least provide excerpts from them. It's all about definition edge. That was another question that came up. So there'll be clear definitions in any of the follow-ups that we provide. But Nicki, do you want to provide any just top-level assessment for the pace of growth in edge?
Yeah, I'm scrambling to look up the report right now to make sure I don't speak out of line. So that this may be something I have to follow up with separately. Short qualitative answer is it's exponentially high, and it's largely driven by just the sheer increase in sophistication of devices, and just coupled with the amazing amount of use cases that keep piling up each year. But I can certainly dig in and get a bit more of a tangible number back to you.
Got it.
Nikki, I think I found. Oh, sorry. I found that we've projected that CSP spend on edge compute infrastructure would grow at a 76% CAGR in the 2018 to 2023 timeframe, spend including CapEx and OpEx from telecom and cable operators and web scalers on edge compute infrastructure.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Catie. I mean, with this question, like there's a lot of layers too that can be peeled back. Some people, want to know just more about the telco side. Some people are focused more on, the actual on-prem device side. So even if the question needs to be a bit more nuanced, we can certainly get there. But yeah, thanks for finding that.
All right, let's see. A couple more questions. Where do I think it's infrastructure as a service solutions like Dell Apex and HPE GreenLake or VMware Cloud fall in the cloud reporting. So we do, to the degree that those are not just financial, a shift to a subscription model for hardware. We cover that in the cloud report, but it doesn't necessarily fit in some of the taxonomy for reporting, but we do cover that pretty extensively. We have a Dell cloud report as well as an HPE cloud report where we look at, that's a big part of the offering strategy that we've been tracking. Any other comments from maybe Catie on that question?
Yeah, I think you summed it up. We include that as part of private cloud reporting, and then cloud components as well. Those hardware and software components that customers use to kind of stand up their own private clouds inside their data centers. So that's kind of where we see Dell and HPE.
Got it. Let's see. One more question before we wrap it up. This is a good broad one to end on. How do we see enterprises choosing edge computing solutions or hybrid cloud deployments or a combination of both? Whom is best equipped, in our opinion, to serve that market? Yeah, so I think that it goes back to that focus on PaaS that we have talked about in just about every section of the presentation today. The Kubernetes management plane really is critical for customers that are, which is most customers, going to have a mixed environment. Edge is certainly earlier on in terms of the specific requirements and how customers are addressing that, but especially with the accelerated adoption, I think that's one thing that, it's great in terms of the demand, but it also takes customers to a point of complexity more quickly than they hadn't anticipated. And so being able to leverage those management capabilities is really important for them, as well as managed services. I think that's the other area where we see a clear demand and trending in terms of it can be automated and packaged. Customers are valuing that given the staffing difficulties and challenges of trying to operate all this new technology using their own internal resources. Okay, unless there's anything else from the team to add to that, I think it's a good place to end. Thanks to everybody again for joining. You'll get a survey to get your feedback and allow us to improve these sessions. And we'll have another webinar coming up next week, so feel free to hit the page and subscribe and attend that one as well. Thanks again, and have a good rest of your day.
Bye, take care.